La 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 la. Cha la 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 la. Ha, 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 ha,
A classic, an American classic.
La. I don't hear anything yet. Let me refresh it. Let me refresh it.
I only see the blue canary on there. I don't
That's
know
what
if
I
that's
see.
what's
Yeah,
supposed to
yeah,
be on there. Oh,
yeah. That's what I see.
Audio,
oh,
audio's
Oh, here we
coming
go.
through.
Yeah, it's coming.
all right. I'm gonna send out the tweet. Let the people know.
Give.
Okay. Are you ready to roll?
I think so. We're gonna
All
hope
right.
and pray.
Let's do our mic, our clap check here. So, clap on 3. 1, 2, 3. Clap. 1, 2, 3. Clap.
Like
1, 2, 3. Clap. It's gonna look like a cult following on here. All right. We'll roll this thing. Blah, 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 blah. Hey, and welcome to I Want to Be Your Canary. This is a Final Fantasy podcast, and tonight I am hanging out with my dear friends, Mr. Scooter,
Hey, everybody.
Mr. TJ,
Ahoy!
and Mr. Dyston.
To my international friends, konnichiwa.
There you go. Do you actually have international friends?
No, I do not. I do not. I'm hopeful that we have some. I want to be your canary international friends.
We actually do have like a weirdly bigger UK following.
Oh, dang it!
That's all right. Well, if it makes you feel any better, my wife's best friend lives in Tokyo, so
There we go. That was for her.
there you go. There you go. So, Jen, that's for you. All right. Hey, tonight we are going to pick up the second half of Final Fantasy VIII and the story itself. And as we were talking kind of off air, I was kind of formulating this in my head. I feel like we are coming to the end of the school year where you have a big final or a big semester, big semester final, and you did your best to study what you could, but you were also kind of like, what was that entire course about again? That's kind of what that's kind of what the second part of Final Fantasy feels like. Kind of feels like a real question mark. And feels like, wow, I got a lot of information and I think I have a grasp on it, but I'm not really sure. What do we think?
I'm with you. I mean, it's fuzzy. It was a long time ago, even though I've played it many times. Yeah.
I as I said in the first show, I remember the your foray onto the White Seed ship as being the first time I lost the story. You start failing to get your head wrapped around what exactly is going on, and the story starts to get away from you a little bit. You start to realize this isn't your daddy's Final Fantasy anymore.
Yeah, I remember it's been a long time since I've played this one, so just off the bat, it's tough for me to recall a lot of things. But I like to try to watch a little story recap before we do some of these podcasts, and whew, even the story recap was flying over the top of the head a little bit.
Yeah.
There's a lot of twists and turns in this final half of the game.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of a weird, and I know that we've probably said at this point ad nauseum, but it's just a weird departure from the previous Final Fantasies, I feel, to go, okay, well, here's a relatively linear story. There's some weird, like this whole dream thing. And then it's like, okay, surprise, time compression. Let's get weird. So, yes. Agreed. And kind of where we left off was with Alone getting onto the Adia's ship. And I don't know how much we tapped into talking about Alone, and just she is kind of what this whole story is revolving around. Um, is her ability to kind of send Squall into the past. She has this weird, super special ability that is going to essentially drive the real big part of the story here in just a little bit after after she gets taken onto Adia's ship. And you start kind of you start to figure out what's going on, and we're going to run into some real classic Final Fantasy trope with Adia pretty immediately after this, when you realize, oh wow, the bad guy isn't the bad guy after all. But I mean, it wouldn't be a Final Fantasy without that, right?
It seems to happen in almost every single one, right?
Yes. So, all right. So, Final Fantasy VIII, we are on Adia's ship, and what is our next? What's the next part of this story that we are talking about here?
So, if memory serves, what happens after the White Sea ship is that Balam Garden crashes, and in the kind of chaos, you find out that the Galbadian army and Adia are after Alone. You don't know why, but you know that she's after her, and basically there's a bit of chaos as the Seeds end up battling the Galbadian army. After that whole skirmish takes place, Cid actually puts Squall in command of all of the Seeds. Right. So you don't. Cid's very what's the word I'm looking for? He makes it sound like it's Squall's destiny. He's very speechy about it, and Squall doesn't really get it. I remember as a kid going through this the first time, early high school, late junior high, and I didn't pick up on this the first go around.
Yeah.
But when you go through the story a little bit, you understand that Cid had this in mind all along. We'll explain why in just a little bit. But Squall becomes the semi-reluctant leader of all Seeds, and in effect a general for an army. So that's kind of that's a sizable chunk of story exposition that the game gives you in actually pretty short order. There isn't a lot of gameplay that happens across a lot of these cutscenes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So kind of after that or like right before there, you crash where you're talking about crash. That's when you crash into Fisherman's Horizon.
Right.
That is correct.
And I just love the Fisherman's Horizon area.
It's a cool
think
place,
that's got
and like
it
going
is.
from game to game, like Fisherman Horizon still sticks out in my mind. Like quite a few very memorable scenes happen there anyway. But
And don't you have to like apologize to the
Yeah.
mayor? Like, hey, sorry, we crashed our
that's like your
Yeah,
floating
it's actually
fortress
pretty
in your
funny.
it's
town.
the first order of business, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
And so yeah, once you crash there, and then you go back and you realize that the Balam's under this siege, right? And you're kind of realizing that it's not necessarily the students that are fighting here, but it happens to be kind of a lot of the army that has taken over and is kind of doing this fighting together. And the area is under the Albanian occupation. And at this point, you realize, okay, this alone person is becoming very central, and there are multiple, essentially, people out there who are looking for her.
Right.
So, all right, let's see here. So after you get the battle, I guess even before that a little bit, this is like the one thing that Irvine brings to the table, is that he is the only one who remembers that all of your little squad there, except Renoa, kind of grew up in the same orphanage.
That's right.
And that's with Edea, the sorceress, was the mother of this orphanage. And you all grew up together, but because he didn't train as a seed, he wasn't exposed to the Guardian forces as much, which the Guardian forces were like kind of like melting their mind, I guess, make them more forgetful. And so you kind of start to figure this out, that everybody conveniently kind of knows each other except Renoa, but because Irvine didn't train as a seed, he was able to recall all of this, and you start to realize like, oh, okay. I feel like that's kind of like the first like crack in the armor of realizing, okay, here comes
Maybe
Edea not being a bad person.
right, and maybe somehow we're all related, and from past times or something. You kind of do get those hints. At this point, still, my first playthrough, I wasn't putting that together quite yet, but you're kind of seeing how it would fit together. I also thought it was interesting that, like you're saying, the GFs turn out to be this like memory barrier or kind of thing for everybody, which is weird.
Yeah, the
game-
writers needed some sort of excuse to squeeze that one in there.
The game really doesn't do a very good job of unpacking that one. It's kind of thrown in there, and it allows Irvine to take center stage, albeit for a pretty short time, as he kind of explains what he knows, and then nobody else seems to.
Right.
But they explain it away through the Guardian forces, but how that plays into the rest of the game isn't very well unpacked.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of this moment, I mean, why Squall is like connected to Elone? Isn't he like, now you don't like, as the player you don't know this, but he is trying to recall his big sister, right?
I don't. Well, so at the risk of kind of, and I guess it's explained very shortly after this. The reason Elone is special is because Elone is the one person in the world that can compress time. The time compression is what allows Squall to make contact with Laguna and his group. Why it's targeting Squall early on isn't actually made very clear. You don't actually figure that out right up until the end. But the reason Elone is seeked out by so many people is because she can cast time compression. Now, why Ultimecia is looking for her, I guess we'll get to a little bit later. That isn't revealed until pretty close to the end. But her ability to cast that time compression spell, which is the reason we're getting these weird flashbacks, is kind of the linchpin of the story as it surrounds Alone.
Yeah. And you so you, while you're in the I think it's when you're in Galbadia, you're doing that fight. That's when you're gonna fight Seifer and Adia, and you're gonna defeat Adia, and then you're going to quickly see. I think this is the part where Rinoa is taken over by Ultimecia's spirit, and she ends up reviving Seifer, and you kind of realize at this point that Adia is being used as a just a medium for Ultimecia's spirit or Ultimecia's plan. So you are able to break Adia, I think, away from that, and Ultimecia says, "Okay, peace," and she gets out of that, and then you start to unpack the Adia. Ultimecia, this time compression idea, where the game should have just paused right there and just like should have been like, okay, here's some guided notes, here's an outline.
This is what we're
get
dealing
a pen
with.
and a paper, because it's gonna be
Get some popcorn.
It's gonna get weird from here on out. It's gonna be it's gonna be a weird one. So ultimately, Ultimecia's plan is she wants to kind of all of the people like Alone be able to I don't even know exactly what it would be, but if she can kind of capture all of those kind of people like Pokemon, she can kind of become that ultimate god.
It's like Highlander, right? There can be only one.
Yeah.
And Ultimecia needs Alone to find all of the sorceresses, and they can occupy different bodies, of which you find out who can actually house that power, and it's a very critical plot point towards the end of the game. But her goal is to become the one. The one true sorceress with all of the power, and she needs Alone's power to compress time and find all of those different people.
Essentially, isn't she doing this because she is aware of the prophecy that she will be like eventually defeated by Squall?
I don't know if it's by Squall, but I'm fairly certain that she's. The goal is, collect all the sorceress's power, become a living god, all that fun stuff. If there is some sort of prophecy, my memory is super sketchy on it. I wouldn't doubt it, though.
Yeah, I thought that was why that Sid started the school in the first place, is because there was a prophecy that the leader of Seed would be the one to defeat the sorceress.
That's a fair comment, because it's revealed that Adia runs the orphanage, and Sid is married to Adia, and Sid is obviously your headmaster at Balamb, and the way he talks to Squall when he turns over the keys to basically become the general of the Balamb army, for lack of a better term. He talks like this was preordained, that this was going to happen, and he's known about it for years. And at this time, Squall's what, 19?
Yeah, right around.
So I mean, you don't talk like that unless you've known something like that for a long time. So you got to believe that he knew this right from the giddy up.
You know what's interesting? It's interesting that just like this far into this podcast episode, like how much we're having to dig into exposition to try to make sense of the story, like just up to this point.
100% right.
Well, because again, this is where this story gets really.
Because Yeah, if you're just playing through the game right now, there is so much that's going on behind the books that you just do not know
Yeah.
about.
But that's
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And Ultimecia alone's so important because essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ultimecia pretty much has to slingshot herself off of Alone because Alone can go back further
Yep.
than Ultimecia can send herself back further than Ultimecia can, and that's what Ultimecia is trying to
Right.
get. That's
that ability.
That ability, that time compression to kind of be able to find all of the sorceresses so she can become the Highlander, become the one. So, okay, all right, well. So it got weird there, and it's gonna continue to get weirder. So, so Rinoa goes into a coma. Another favorite Final Fantasy, not trope, but I mean, you think I can think of a couple of games right off the top of my head where
It's not the first time this has happened.
So yeah, it's not the first time somebody's going to the old coma or getting all sick and you needing to find whatever. So Rinoa kind of goes into this coma. And Squall carries her into this kind of like icy, desolate wasteland.
Right.
And then you kind of come up against this area you realize is like this futuristic city
hidden
that's
behind this magic wall that appears to just be more vast Iceland, right? Where it looks like it goes on forever. And then it's kind of like that Truman Show moment where you run into the wall right at the end of the ocean and you're going, wait, this is not sky, this is just a door. Okay. And then you get that. Honestly was one of my favorite parts of the game, period. Just to see that futuristic city in that game, because it was so different than every other place that you were at previously. So and you had to go find Laguna, right? Or did you know that yet?
So
I don't think you know it yet.
Well, so before we get too far down that road, the game, so Rinoa is actually the one that revives Cypher, and the game doesn't really unpack that. It's odd, and I remember the first time going through it, you're watching, but you're also like hitting X because you're trying to move things forward. And I remember thinking like, what's she doing? What's going on? And then I missed that part. I didn't put 2 and 2 together, and Rinoa revives Cypher, who I worked real hard to. That was a battle and a half. And she goes and revives him, and Rinoa was in my main party. This was a big deal, right?
This is an issue.
It's like the first time you go through Final Fantasy VII and you realize you pick Aerith in your main party, and you're like, oh, gotta make some changes now. So you're getting that same kind of fear, and she acts weird, and then she falls in the coma. The game doesn't unpack exactly what happened, but I mean, to 16-year-old me, I was floored. I had no idea what was going on. So Squall realizes, like, okay, can't be super angsty guy. It's okay to have a little bit of feelings, and that the first kind of instead of it being an unrequited love, it's a little bit more requited, let's say. Sure. And he's looking for a loan because the time, his logic is, I'm going to go back in time and I'm going to prevent Rinoa from falling into the coma. That's his logic. They managed to, and I cannot remember the name of the town. I want to say it's Shavat, but I know that's Xenogears. But that's also what it reminds me of. I cannot remember the name of the town that's behind the cloaking device.
Esther City.
Yes, Esther City. Thank you. So he knows that Alone has gone to Esther City. He finds his way there, and then he visits Rinoa. So the garden goes back to Fisherman's Horizon, I think, if if I remember correctly. And he goes to visit Renoa, and then he falls asleep, right? Yeah, and then you have your
Yep.
next Laguna, your next Laguna sequence, and this is where the stories start becoming very parallel.
In real time,
At least,
right?
yeah. So like Laguna is also trying to find Alone, but it's young Alone,
Mhm.
and Alone has been kidnapped by yet another sorceress, but it's sorceress, not Idea, not Ultimecia, but the old, the
Adele.
Laguna.
Adele,
Yeah,
yeah,
thank you.
Adele.
So she's been kidnapped, and um, they they actually start to blur the lines where Alone realizes that she's actually communicating with people that she's having be affected by this time compression phenomenon that are happening. So it's a lot to unpack, and
Jeez.
if you weren't lost before, you're definitely lost
You
now.
should be, at least,
Yeah.
as a kid playing this game. I mean, how could you not be? So
So it was definitely tough because Squall is now, at this point, this is the first Laguna sequence where he's talked to Alone and he understands what's going on now.
Mhm.
It's not 100% clear exactly who Laguna is to Squall, I believe. Um, but they're obviously linked together in this time compression phenomenon, and Alone is the commonality between the two, at least at this point.
Mhm.
And the only other big thing that I would say is worth mentioning is that up to this point in the game, like Squall has been very lone wolf, right? As with a lot of like the Final Fantasy like protagonist characters, they start off kind of like a lone wolf character, but slowly like learn, hey, I got to rely on the rest of the team. It seems like it's right after the sequence where Renoa goes into comatose, where he finally starts figuring out, okay, maybe I shouldn't just be in this for myself. Maybe I got to care about the rest of the team a little more here.
And they rely on me as well, right? Like, that's
Yeah,
another
absolutely.
big realization, because like we were saying earlier, when Sid gave him the keys to the army, basically, he still wasn't very on board with the whole idea, it seemed. So, and I remember he has kind of and you get these the internal thoughts of Squall in this game, which I thought was kind of interesting
Yeah.
too. So you get kind of these like existential kind of questions that he's always asking, and you can see his thought process change during that point. So, yeah, it's the character arc is happening.
Yep.
And once you get into Esther City, that's when you meet like Dr. Odine, and you're getting a lot, and that's like a really like high tech city, and you get a lot of answers as to kind of what is going on. And that is also when you realize that Esther is, I'm sorry, in Esther has a lunar base that you are going to travel to, and Alone is on that lunar base, and Squall is like, hey, like, I want to take Renoa to go see Alone because I know that there's a connection there. And so you end up going into this onto this lunar base, and it's it was kind of one of those moments where there's a couple of connections that I feel like this game and Final Fantasy IV had, and just kind of the outer space, just the random outer space times. That was kind of one of them.
Going to the moon, Cullen.
Yeah. So you are, when you're up there, that's when you see was it Adele, sorceress Adele. She's trapped in this like thing that is harnessing her energy, and makes her unable to use her powers as a sorceress. She's kind of just like frozen essentially in this area. And they also are checking out the moon, and they're like, what's up with all these monsters here? that are like weirdly forming kind of in this area in the moon. So when you get up there, you start realizing something's going on up here.
That's not good.
And it's not good. And even though Dr. Odine says that Rinoa is no longer possessed by the sorceress, she gets a little weird when you get up to the lunar base.
So, like, what I actually didn't. So I remember my first time going through this. You learned that Ultimecia is actually just possessing women that have the ability to hold the sorcerer's power.
Mm-hmm.
I actually didn't put two and two together that Edea was no longer possessed.
Mm-hmm.
Like she you're done fighting her, and then she kind of falls to the ground, and then you Cypher's defeated, and then there isn't much left after that. But you actually find out that Edea follows you to Esther, I believe, which if you're not following the story correctly, and the first time through I definitely was not, that's a bit of a head scratcher, because this is it's like X-Death kind of showing up and now being amenable to discussion,
right.
because he's no longer, you know what I mean, like it's one of those things where you just have you have to get your head wrapped around the new scenery at this point. There's a lot of story that's unpacked in a short amount of time in this base. What I didn't get the first time, and I definitely got the second time, was that they actually reveal that the origin of all of the monsters that are on planet Earth or whatever the planet's called actually come from the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of a head scratcher in and of itself. But they explain how this gigantic pillar basically transports all of these monsters to the planet that you're living on, and the sorceress Adele is kind of at the forefront as somebody who was supposed to be controlling it. And yeah, it's a lot of story unpacked in a very short period of time, that if you're a habitual expresser to skip a lot of dialogue, you are going to miss a lot of it.
Yeah, and I need to go back to something I said earlier, because when you talk with Odine, I said that Rinoa is told that she is not a sorceress. What I meant was Edea is told that she's no longer the sorceress, because when Rinoa goes up, it's clear that there's something
going on.
There's something going on.
Yeah.
So, so when she gets up there, there's like this: do not press button, do not release sorceress. And
pretty much it.
That's really good, actually.
And you know what's gonna happen. You know what's gonna happen there. It's dude, it's like this one. I need you to do one thing. Don't press that button. Okay. That's what this whole thing is for. Don't press that button.
I mean, it's one of those borrowed tropes as well, right? Like where the mind control Final Fantasy VII Cloud with the black materia, can't help himself kind of a thing, and it's and it's an infuriating cutscene to watch. But it is what it is, and you're getting deeper into the game at this point, so you feel like it's even worse that, like, oh no, like Rinoa's in my top 3 here, like I'm gonna have to put Zell back in, like. So as a 16-year-old kid, I'm very upset with the things I'm seeing at this point, because it's looking like I'm going to lose one of my main characters to what is essentially could become the big bad here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
at this point in the story, you've also literally carried her to the moon, so you're invested.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So when you are in space and you do release Adele, and all those monsters just went, sweet, we're going to Earth.
Yeah.
Um, then you realize that you got to evacuate the lunar base and it's gonna blow up. But Renoa is right now like a Misfit song and is lost in space out there, just kind of floating around. And so this is one of those moments where it's like a lot happens in a little bit of time. Squall says, "Alone, like, help me out, help me figure this out." So she sends back Squall to realize when that it was actually Ultimecia possessing Renoa to revive Cypher. So you figure that out then, and she's like, "Well, there's nothing I can do." And he's, "Try again." So she tries again, and that's when Squall is able to communicate about Renoa's emergency oxygen supply in her spacesuit to keep her alive just a little bit longer. And this is kind of that real turning point for Squall, where we started to see him feel sort of certain way towards Renoa, that requited love. But this is that moment where it's like, okay, he's made that full turn. He's made that full corner turn, and has gone from kind of that selfish seed, lone wolf person to somebody who is really caring about the party and has to, it goes out and essentially saves Renoa in one of the best love scenes of any Final Fantasy. Absolutely excellent.
Absolutely, without a doubt.
So ends up saving Renoa, right? End up saving Renoa, and in the game, it's really sad because if you don't end up saving her, you get to try again, but it's like Renoa is lost in space forever, or some
yeah, fade to black. It's pretty
brutal.
The game doesn't pull punches, letting
Really
you
punches
know
you in the
that you
gut.
failed.
Yeah. So you end up it's looking grim, but one of the spaceships kind of gets blasted towards you as the Ragnarok, and you're able to hold on to that and essentially bring that back to Earth. And you kind of find yourself out of that debacle there. So
one small but very important tidbit. When Alone sends you to Renoa's past to figure out why she revived Cypher, it's revealed in discussion between Squall and Alone that Squall has his memories back, and he remembers that Alone is in fact his sister. To your point, Dyston, it's again a very short but important piece of dialogue that really explains a lot of the interactions that you two have had together, because to that point she's actually upset that you have no idea who she is, and you have no idea why. All you see her in the library for Balam scenes in disc 1, and that's about it.
Yep.
She becomes a central plot point, but you don't interact like brother and sister would. So it's revealed that brother and sister, which is important because it does tie a lot of the time compression part of the story back in, of why Squall runs into who he runs into. But very big point that we want to make emphasis on is that the Alone story starts to kind of round out into form that she is in fact Squall's sister.
Yeah. Man, just twists and turns.
We're getting through it though. We're doing great.
Oh,
We are.
Man. Doing something. All right, so you come back to when you come back to the back to Earth. What are we doing?
So when you come back to Earth, even though you're the hero, you saved the day, you managed to save your your love. Um, it's pretty well known at this point. If it wasn't clear before with the whole saving of Cypher, it's very clear now with the release of Adele that Renoa has in fact been inhabited by the sorceress, and this is where the city of Esther demands that she be handed over to be held in the same custody as Adele was. And that's um, Squall's very upset with this, but Renoa realizes where she is in the world right now and actually agrees to go along with it.
Yeah. And so Squall recognize and even when they're going back, I think it's Renoa pretty much says like, I can't go with you because they're gonna come after me.
Yeah.
And recognizes that they know her situation. And Squall he kind of gets back and realizes, okay, well, I have to go. I have to go after Renoa. I have to go rescue Renoa. And so that's kind of where I feel, and I don't know what disc this is in. I'm not sure if this is like the middle of 3, end of 3, but I feel like this is kind of where you start to get to that race to the finish.
I want to say that the rescue Renoa in outer space is the end of 3.
That sounds right.
Now, in fairness, the last couple times I've gone through this game, it has been discless. Yeah. So it's a little bit different when you're not physically removing the disc and putting it in. It's not as much of a milestone on PC or other mediums. But I want to say that the Outer Space Rescue is the end of disc 3, so we're right at the start of disc 4 here, if memory serves.
Okay, so when you go back, like Esther City is not in good shape.
They're on attack against you now, aren't they? I remember the whole city changed from this like cool, nice place to be that everybody just is there to talk with you. Now they're all enemies, so it's not quite the same.
Yep.
Okay, so Renoa ends up having to get saved by you get the Ragnarok. That becomes your space shuttle, or that becomes the spaceship that you're going to get. Now, this is also that kind of that important moment that harkens back to the opening, is that flower field. Squall and Renoa kind of meet up and they say, hey, if we ever get separated, this is where we're going to meet back. And that's important also because of kind of what happens in the end scene as well. So that's kind of not necessarily a huge story moment, but an important one that that you just need to hold on to. So then this is the time where you go back to Esther City and you've been in kind of community. Seed's been pretty much requested to hire Squall to do something. So they go back to Esther City, and this is where the Laguna, Ward, Kiros, and your party story comes finally together. And you find that Laguna is like the dude in this area of Esther City.
Yeah.
So it's very, this is finally where like you've been getting tidbits all on, and this is where if you were lost and you struggled to catch up, you may end up kind of coming back to the fold a little bit here if you're paying attention. So they refer to the president of Esther a handful of times in the story to this point, and you find out exactly who that person is, and lo and behold, it's Laguna. And he actually succeeds Adele, who was the ruler of Esther way back when. And there's actually a fairly good bit of dialogue where Laguna kind of reveals kind of how the whole ordeal with Adele worked, and how he ended up in the place where he where he was. But yeah, there's a lot of backstory reveal here. There's a lot of mid story reveal here, and there's a lot of future story reveal here. And
Mhm.
I remember going through this the first time, and quite frankly, the second, third, and however many times I played this game. This is where it's like oh yeah, that's right. This is where this all happened. So this is the aha moment for me. I'm sure it was for a lot of people, but if you're paying attention here, a lot of the story kind of gets starting to wrap up in a bit of a neater package.
Yeah. And Laguna being kind of the president, I guess, of Esther City. He reminds me of just kind of how he's just kind of dressed like whatever, kind of like low key.
Lackadaisical.
He reminds me of the I don't know if you guys have followed the news at all lately, but the president from El Salvador. The president from El Salvador, Nayib, I think it's Bukele.
Mm-hmm.
He just he's always wearing like a backwards hat. He looks like Mr. Cool president. Like that's kind of what he reminds me of. Oh
yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of what he reminds me of. It's just kind of like, hey, no, I'm not a regular president. I'm a cool president.
Yeah.
So, but that's where you're going to. That's where those stories really like intertwine, and you could kind of see it coming because you could see like them like inching closer towards each other, but now they've kind of finally overlapped.
Well, and after the explanation of how Laguna and Adele's story ends, Laguna actually goes into his plans of how he was going to reconcile his family, and you actually figure out that Laguna is Alone's dad. And although Laguna actually doesn't know who you are, Laguna is actually Squall's dad as well. You put two and two together. It's not, they don't actually explicitly say it,
right?
But it's made clear that Rain, the Squall's mother, ends up going to they're separated from Laguna with Alone, and then Rain dies, and Alone ends up with Squall, the baby Squall, and they're at this orphanage. So the original time compression that has Squall sent into the past to become Laguna or live as Laguna is actually Alone's attempt to keep her family together, which is a heartbreaking revelation as it comes out. That this is a very young Alone that has made up her mind that this is how this is going to go, and she's going to use her baby brother to kind of live through the experiences that her dad had to try to change the past and keep them together. I remember I did not pick up that Laguna was Squall's dad the first go around. I did not figure that out because it's not explicitly said, but it's absolutely the case. But yeah, it's actually a really heartbreaking scene, and the dialogue does a good job to kind of tug at the heartstrings, but I also felt it was a bit of a missed opportunity to have a few more cutscenes involved. I remember it being a little dialogue heavy, and it felt like you could have replaced some of that dialogue with some cutscene. That's me being nitpicky. Again, this is my favorite game of all time, but I mean, this is the heart punch of the game. Like you gotta get people right.
And they just sock it to you, though. I mean, every time I play this through, it's getting towards that part of where you discover the story of Laguna, Rain, Alone, and Squall. It's that part to me, and then the fact that Rain isn't there anymore to see all of this towards the end. I mean, stepping ahead here, but Yeah, it sucks. It's hard to watch.
It's one of those games like that when you play it back through knowing what you know,
Yeah,
it makes it a very different game. It's kind of like if you watch Fight Club the first
sure.
time and then you watch Fight Club knowing what you know the second time and you're just like, okay, like these things make more sense to me now. So it's kind of one of those things that knowing that information, rewatching everything and replaying everything just gives it a different, like almost just gives it like a different
Yeah,
playthrough,
more
which
more
is
depth.
nice.
So a replayable game for sure for the story alone.
Hmm.
Because if we haven't done good enough of a job explaining it, I mean, it makes sense. It's a complicated story, so
Yeah.
it takes a few playthroughs. But yeah, now we're getting into the good bits here, though.
Okay. Now this is where it really starts to get like, okay, boys, we got to focus as to exactly what's happening because after this, oh, um, this is where you start to really talk about the time compression. This is where you start to really hear about Ultimecia and her ideas of what she's going to use Alone to do, how she kind of uses her as a slingshot. Like, okay, if I can get to her, then I can go further back. But oh my gosh,
I'm doggy paddling.
oh
Doggy paddling to stay
Yeah.
alive.
Oh,
I the more words that I say, the more it makes it seem like I'm not doggy paddling, but I absolutely am, because this is where the time compression gets really like you start to figure out, okay, Ultimecia is trying to get Alone because Alone can go further back than Ultimecia can otherwise, and Ultimecia wants to go further back in order to make get the other sorceress, but Alone.
Keep
Oh,
swimming.
man.
Keep
CJ,
swimming.
go. CJ, just do it, man.
well, so I mean, I'm gonna stick with your metaphor here. So if Laguna threw you a life preserver and now you're floating again, um, Dr. Odine basically takes that life preserver away and steps on your forehead. You're gonna drown in the details again. And I remember the first time, even the second time through, I had no idea what was going on. However, if uh, the Highlander thing is, there can be only one. The Ultimecia's plan is basically to take over all of the sorceresses across this plane of time that Alone she's able to navigate, but not as well as Alone can.
Hmm.
Um, so her goal is, she's going to take over as many sorceress bodies as she can, but then she's going to find the real Alone and then use Alone to send her consciousness back into, every plane in time,
Yeah.
so that she can be the only sorceress and be, basically this demigod. um this is not very well explained in the game, even if you are paying very, very close attention to it. It's very easy to miss what's going on. And like I said, I've played this game, a handful of times, and even the first 2, 3 times, it's not super clear exactly what is going on.
Mm.
But it's all kind of exposed through dialogue between your party and Dr. Odine. So the between Dr. Odine and Laguna, they are coming up with a plan, and it involves a bit of a sacrifice. And
Hmm.
um, this is where you really, Squall kind of bared his soul a little bit at the end of disc 3 and the early part of disc 4. And you really start to see, he doesn't like this idea, but he understands that he may not get Rinoa back for good if he doesn't go along with this plan. So the basically what the plan is, and I hope I'm gonna get this correct because it's not crystal clear, but the um the plan is for Seed to basically kill Adele,
Mhm.
who is the current host of Ultimecia in that in the current era, and the goal is for if they get rid of Adele, the powers are going to go to Renoa because Renoa is the only sorceress capable host left, and then Alone would send um, both of them back into the past,
Yep.
and then Ultimecia would try to cast her time compression, and then Alone's going to try to send everybody back to their own time, and that's how they're going to stop things. Again, this is a lot of information that is exposed to you in very few lines of dialogue, and you thought you were caught up, and I remember 16-year-old me failed miserably to stay caught up at this point.
Oh.
So yeah, it's a lot to unpack. It's a very convoluted plan, and it's not explained very well by Laguna exactly how you're going to pull this off. But this is their grandiose plan. They're going to get rid of Adele. They're going to use Renoa as a pawn, and then it all hinges on Alone, kind of, you know, uh,
Throw a
she
curveball.
yeah, she's basically gotta kind of stop the whole time compression thing all at once, and hopefully it works.
So you end up fighting Adele, and that's after Ultimecia kind of like connects Renoa to Adele, and you're gonna fight Adele. After you fight Adele, that's when there's like a little bit of time compression going on, which allows Squall and the squad to travel kind of into the future, into Ultimecia's castle, like on those big chains. You can kind of get out and travel the world a little bit, but everything's blocked off. It's kind of a pain. But that's where Ultimecia's castles, where all of the like end game content mega monsters are as well. But it is you are in the future, and when you fight Ultimecia finally, she kind of taps into Squall and creates a guardian force based on the line that he has, Griever.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And then you end up fighting a few different forms of Ultimecia until she turns into her ultimate self.
It was a long fight, but yeah.
Yeah.
Super long, super hard.
That was it was so one of the kind of funny gameplay tropes of Final Fantasy is how the end boss is not the hardest fight in the game.
Yeah.
It is a very real possibility that for a good majority of people, Ultimecia was their hardest fight in the game, and it wasn't really that close.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Just got dominated. Several rounds.
And had you have not managed your party accordingly, if you didn't fully understand the junction system, if you didn't have, maybe a couple extra optional guardian forces, you didn't stop to get Brothers or Doom Train or Jumbo Cactuar or some of those.
Jumbo Cactuar, let's go.
Some of those cool optional ones, you might have taken that one on the chin your first, second, and third time trying it.
Yeah.
Yep. Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Colin, there's one part I remember about this game. This part of the game just sticks into my mind so well, and I think it's right after you fight Adele. It's this part. So Cypher has these two friends, right? I think it's like Fujin and Raijin, and I think you fight these guys several times. And they're like, we really don't want to fight you. We're here for our buddy Cypher. We just want to bring this guy back to the light. Yeah. And like this world is gonna end. These two friends, they're just like, we're really here for him. We're not against you guys, but he's our friend.
Yeah, and you gotta appreciate the loyalty there.
I just always remember that part. I was like, geez, man, this guy's gonna make the world burn over here, buddy. It's time to cut the
The
cord.
They did their best to keep a lot of things that made Seven work, and I always saw the Cypher Fujin Raijin group as being very parallel to the Turks, as a recurring
Yeah, I can see that.
mid-boss character that, you know, not super critical to the story, but you know, always found its way to trip you up in
Yeah.
whatever you were doing.
Kind of like
right?
a silly rival.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I found I agree with you, Dyson. I found it actually very refreshing that the two Fujin and Raijin were just like,
Mhm.
yeah, man, we don't we don't know if we really want to rumble here. So yeah, I'm with you on that one. I found that actually pretty refreshing because you don't normally get that.
Yeah. Oh man, so I think we're at the final, like the end here. After when you beat Ultimecia, it's kind of like there's a massive like ripple in time, and um, things happen, and then the once you beat her, like that reality starts to uh decompress, I guess, and everybody kind of has to find their way back to where they're supposed to be. And I think that Squall tries to go back, but he goes back too far. He goes back too far into a different reality where Adia is not yet the sorceress, but the kind of that matron of the orphanage. And you're starting to I think you actually watch her get possessed by Ultimecia that kind of that first time.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, like you just travel back too far and you kind of get lost in that ripple of time.
Yeah, he ends up actually, you know, seeing Adia get her powers. So Ultimecia passes on the powers to Adia at that point, but you know, Squall, who's still 19-year-old Squall at this point, is talking to Adia, and he's talking about things like the garden and seed, and you know, and none of those exist
Right.
at this point, because you know they're young Squall should be in the orphanage at this point, and the game kind of hints that it's you know, um, Squall basically kind of sets his own destiny in motion by
Mm-hmm.
having these conversations with Adia, and Adia works with her husband, who becomes your headmaster Sid, to establish the garden, and trains Squall to become, you know, the seed that he's destined to be. So it's a, you know, it's almost a one of those time loop bootstrap type.
It's an episode of Doctor Who here.
That's right. So it's not made crystal clear that you know, Squall basically is the master of his own destiny in this regard, but the game kind of shows that you know, those discussions that Squall's having kind of kicks things in motion.
Mm-hmm.
The downside is that, you know, after those conversations, he doesn't belong in this time, so he starts slipping into, you know, the nothingness. It starts to go black again, and you know, the game's made clear that you know, your group of 6 survived because of the bonds they forged with each other, bonds that were forged very early on in the orphanage. So the fact that Squall is slipping into nothingness, his only way out is to, you know, kind of concentrate on Rinoa and his team, and try to focus and stay, you know, in the present, and find his way home. And Cullen, to your point, the Rinoa is waiting for Squall at the flower field near Adia's house, and the game gets a little abstract at this point, because if I remember correctly, the cutscene, you know, Renoa turns into, you know, a feather in Squall's imagination, and you know, he grabs the feather, but he falls unconscious, and then Renoa magically finds him, and they end up together in the real world. And that whole scene isn't very well unpacked, but you kind of got to use your imagination there. I remember, you know, leaving that whole cutscene like I have no idea what happened after the discussion with Adia. That whole cutscene is really hard to get your head wrapped around.
Yeah.
But you know, at the end of the day, you know, the two young lovers are reunited at the place they said they would, and things start wrapping up in a nice neat bow.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was a
Oh,
good ending all around
man.
though. The whole ending scene, you know, you get to see Laguna there at Rain's gravestone, and you get to see you know, another scene towards the very end with everybody at a big ball again, kind of like at the beginning of the game where they Squall and Renoa first meet, and so there's that whole like you know, everybody gets back together kind of moment there. Yeah.
Would have been a great book for the ability to further unpack some things rather than just kind of like
Yeah.
glaze through a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah.
I mean, it could have been, I guess, a bigger game as well. You could have done it that way. But there's just a lot of cool ideas here that just don't fully get unpacked because they were limited by space and time. And it was confusing as it was. But, you know, I feel like if they would have explained it a little bit more, it wouldn't have been as cryptic. And maybe that's part of the enjoyment of it is a little bit of a cryptic game.
Yeah.
But holy smokes, that I feel tired just from like the mental rigor.
You did it.
Yeah.
You did it.
Now, guys, I know we're celebrating here. I know we're feeling real good about ourselves. Okay, we're feeling real good about ourselves right now.
Do you feel good about yourself?
I do not feel good about myself. I
don't know that
definitely
I feel
have to
good
play
about
through
myself.
Final Fantasy VIII again. But you know, and this could be almost like a podcast on it, like within itself. But oftentimes when I hear like people talking about Final Fantasy VIII, there's a controversy that pops up frequently.
Dun dun dun.
The controversy I'm referring to is Renoa. Is she secretly the sorceress Ultimecia?
Ooh.
Yeah, have you guys heard this controversy? I've read.
I will not hear it.
I've read some articles that go both ways on this one. It's a kind of an interesting topic.
I mean,
that's for our.
Would a sorceress have a border collie dog named Angelo? I think that's one of the questions that you could really counter with that. Is the sorceress Ultimecia capable of forming a relationship with a dog and loving a dog like that? I don't think so. I just don't think so.
Case dismissed.
Maybe if it was a cat, like Dr. Evil has with Mr. Bigglesworth.
I'd say we probably need to add that to our list for the wild conjectures and conspiracies.
Wild conjectures and conspiracies.
Yeah,
Okay.
the next version of that show, because that sounds like that'd be a good one to unpack.
What this game's end cutscenes, I think, are one of the coolest. There's a lot going on, and you actually don't know if Squall makes it back to the correct timeline until the very end, when the garden is kind of floating and they're at the party, and then you see him and Renoa, and it's a stark contrast of the Squall that you first met.
Yeah. He seems happy.
So he does seem happy.
Yeah.
He does seem happy, and you see Cypher and Fujin and Raijin. They're like, they see the garden going above them and they are happy, and it's like not a big deal, and it just kind of seems like everything's okay. Everything's good. It's refreshing.
Little fireworks and stuff, all that jazz. Yeah. No, I mean, like you said, TJ, is that it is wrapped up in kind of that happy ending bow. Yeah. I don't know. Good game. Overall, I know it's obviously your favorite game of all time. For me, it's probably easy top 3 of a Final Fantasy. What about Colin and Dyson?
Dice, go ahead.
Yeah, I remember about this game. So we talked about a little bit about Ultimecia and how difficult that boss was, and I just gotta say, so I've only played this once. I played this game once. It's been a long time since I played it, but she wrecked me. She destroyed me several times. I completely played this game incorrectly. I thought like most RPG games, I thought you had to grind. I thought you had to grind to level up and be a better character, but that's not how this game worked.
Yeah, for our listeners, if you pick this one up and it's available on a myriad of mediums, do not grind to get higher levels thinking that is going to make this game easier. I can tell you with with a high degree of certainty that will not help you. That will make things worse.
Ironically.
Yeah. I mean, I probably spent like just like when I got to that final boss, 10, 15 hours plus just trying to. I mean, first off, I was just bashing my head up against the wall, just grinding some more, and then after scrolling through the internet and finding that was not the smartest thing to do, I finally was able to work my way around it and beat her eventually. But holy hell, that left a bad taste in my mouth for that one.
Yeah, I think for me, as I think it's definitely one of the top Final Fantasy games as far as story goes. Absolutely, I do like Tactics as a story better, just because I like that corruption and darkness between the connivingness between kingdoms and churches and all that.
Colin, and you mentioned the story. What do you guys think about the statement that Final Fantasy VIII is the last great Final Fantasy story?
Yeah, I don't think so. I thought 10 was a solid story. I thought 12 was a fine story as well.
It's I don't know. Go ahead, TJ.
I think that 8 is, in my opinion, the last great story. I will say that I liked 10. 10 is not the epic in terms of a story that 8 was. I liked 12. 12 is not the epic story that 8 was. 7 was obviously, a very good game. 6 was a great game. I think that 4 was a great game. I didn't get exposed to 5 until later, for obvious reasons. But Tactics, I agree. Wonderful story. In my opinion, of all of the games that have Final Fantasy attached to their name, Tactics is right behind 8 in terms of story. Very well done. Multiple layers.
Lots to dig in, yeah.
So, I want a story that is epic, can be dived into, immersed into, has multiple layers. The only thing that I think 8 doesn't have enough of is side story flavor. That ties back into the main story. Minor criticism at best, in my opinion, but that was one thing that 7 did well and 6 did well that 8 didn't. But yeah, Dyson, I'm with you. 8 is the last great epic single player story Final Fantasy.
You are not with me. Those are not my words.
You said them.
People have said this, not me.
Okay.
Now, as far as epic tales, like no doubt the climax, it is a pretty, like, you go to a really high point in 8 for that story, and I don't deny that. I think that I don't know that there are any better stories after 8, but I if you're taking 8 and saying it's the last of the great Final Fantasy stories because like
nothing can achieve that height.
Yeah, nothing can achieve that. I would agree with that. I think
Yeah.
that there are fine, good stories after 8 that are fine. Are there any that are going to reach the intensity and the magnitude that 8 did? No, I don't think that it has yet. But I guess I took the question to mean like, were there any good stories after 8, or was 8 the last of the actual good Final Fantasy stories? But I think if you're comparing anything after 8 to 9 or to 8, you're gonna have a bad time because nothing has reached that pinnacle of just like awesomeness and excellence. But I'll tell you what, the way that they framed up 16, I think that they are gonna take us. I think they're taking a run at.
Hold your tongue. Don't say it. Don't ruin it.
I think
Don't break my heart.
I think they're going to take a run at it. I think that just some of the elements that they've kind of talked about, and they've shown a little bit. Just it's leading up to an epic, and those, whenever I see designs like that, whenever I see character designs like that, I think of Tactics and I go,
this could be good. This could be good, but just
I hope you're right.
Me too.
I got my heart broken when I played through Type 0. I thought it was going to be that, and it was definitely not. But I am waiting with bated breath on that one. I hope it doesn't take another 10 years to get it out.
Apparently 16 is well on its way, from my last understanding. But
that's what I understood too. Is it was pretty far actually into development, but
we'll see what the release is like though, because
I mean, going from first trailer of 15 to release of 15, we may be in for a bit of a wait. But I hope that you are correct.
Yeah, and I also wonder if we're getting on a tangent here, but if they're going to release other content like they did with 15, like a movie before the game and stuff like that. So we'll have to see. But anyway. Back to 8, amazing story. It took us 2 full podcasts to get through it.
Man, and this is like a mega episode right now for us.
It's good stuff.
Okay, well, I feel like I just did a full day's work right there.
Just you got to unpack your brain now. Just go home, relax. Hop in the tub. I don't know, pet your dog, or whatever.
Yeah, just gonna go lay in bed and just re-unpack this in my mind. I'm just gonna gosh dang it. So, all right, all right, boys. Well, that was a good one. That was a doozy. Thank you, TJ, for carrying us through that.
Yep, appreciate it.
We pretty much just got on your back right there. It's just lead us to the promised land. You were pretty much Moses in this episode. Just took us to the land of milk and honey.
I am waiting for the internet army to tear my poor memory apart. I'm waiting for it. I'm sure that I tripped up here and there, but I guess any feedback's good feedback. But I did my best, guys. I really did.
That was a valiant attempt, at least.
It was impressive.
So.
It's exactly as I remember it, TJ.
Yeah.
It's exactly as I remember the game. So, any haters can get gone. But all right, guys. Well, hey, thank you so much. Thank you to our listeners. If you want to follow us on Twitter, you can find us at Canary Podcast. Come and drop a comment. Let us know what you think. We really appreciate that. If you have a way to rate us or comment us on iTunes or whatever, please make sure that you do. And we appreciate all of our listeners. We're up to we're close to 400 listeners in some circles. So we're doing something.
Look at us.
All right.
We're doing something.
Look at us.
Yeah, look at us stumbling into followers here and there. It's like Kramer in Seinfeld, just stumbling into money every which way you can.
Yeah.
All right. Well, guys, it's been real.
It has been fun.
It's been real fun. Hey, have a great night, everybody.
Take it easy.
All the best.
Deuces.
Mm-mm-mm.